our topic today is resilience, and more specifically, it is focused on building a resilient athlete. And as we get through the webinar, we're going to be talking about rebounding and recovery, and just a method for us to talk about building resilience. And we have a great group that signed up. We have athletes, we have coaches, we have sports psychs or mental performance consultants, we have administrators in sports, we have a few parents. So this is an important topic overall for all of us who are involved today. But it almost kind of feels like the timing is right for this specific topic in regards to resilience and the building of the resilient athlete. In North America, fall sports have already started, and winter sports will start fairly soon. Our seasons are changing. And some of the athletes haven't been involved in sport for a long period of time. And for some, it's 18 months to 2 years, and they're getting back to sport, and they're getting back to competitive sport. So now the competitions, the games, the leagues are starting, and our athletes are being challenged. And that's the beauty of being in sport, is that challenge piece. And as athletes and people around athletes, we actually appreciate that part. But at times, athletes through a season, they may respond slower in regards to the resilience, and at times it's very, very low, and it's hard to bring it back up. So this is a timely topic to present on and interact with you. So throughout our entire conversation, the chat function is open. If you want to mute yourself, ask questions, we'll have a little Q&A at the end, but let's make this as interactive as possible. I'm joined by my friend, colleague, co-founder of HeadSet, and it's always nice to be with Dr. Jason Galea. And Jason will be presenting, and we'll be presenting together today. And it's always awesome to have him with us and with me involved, and I always look forward to it. And we have the agenda here in regards to how it's going to be laid out today. There's a couple of terms I want to go through with you as we get started, but then we'll get into the importance of resilience. We'll look at recovery and rebounding, as mentioning in the title of the presentation. Then we're going to focus on what's called the 3 C's of resilience. And then we're going to end with the impact of social support on resilience building. As mentioned earlier, feel free to ask questions throughout. It's way better when it's interactive. We can communicate. And once again, we have a great group that is with us today to be able to talk about this from different perspectives. Then at the end, if you want to save your questions till the end, we'll wrap things up and we'll get to some questions at the very end. But here are a couple of key terms that I just wanted to kind of put out there today, and I'll use these. And I like the terms on the left, but sometimes I talk about the terms on the right. And I'll talk a lot about it today, Dr. J will as well, about mental skills. And mental skills for athletics and outside of athletics is more of a cognitive aspect. It's decision-making. It's cognitively being able to regulate yourself when there are pressures and stressors. But then we have the mental traits and these mental characteristics. And this is confidence. This is resilience. This is your self-concept or self-worth as an athlete or a non-athlete. But we'll bring them together. So I may talk about the mental skills, the cognitive, but then you have the non-cognitive piece. And for every human being, including those in sports, we merge these together. So I might speak to mental skills, but I may be discussing as well those characteristics and traits. But it's hard not to link these two together. So I want to put that forward as well. And then second, and I mentioned it earlier for Dr. J and I, so we created an application and service called HeadSet. We may refer to it as time goes on. It is an application that is customized, use machine learning, artificial intelligence to customize mental skills programs for athletes and teams. So we may refer to our work at HeadSet, but this is an overall topic on resilience in sport. It's not a HeadSet specific one, but we may bring in some of our experiences with HeadSet and also our private practice. And we focus often for our work, Dr. J and I and HeadSet, on 5 key pillars: awareness, confidence, motivation. We also have regulation. And then the 5th one is resilience. And we settled on these 5 because research, the literature kind of brought us to these 5, that athletes with these mental skills or these mental characteristics or traits, these are the ones that athletes in competition and training often speak to, often use. And these are ones that are the most influential. And they're all interactive. We're going to focus on the red rectangle today, resilience, but all 5 of these are related to each other, right? If you kind of think about it, when you're more confident, you may be more resilient. When you're more resilient, you may be more confident. When you're more motivated, you may be more resilient, and vice versa. So these all go hand in hand, but they are independent of each other. And for today, we're going to be specifically looking at resilience. This is how we define resilience. So resilience is the ability to effectively cope and recover from adversity. And there's many different definitions. That is the one that we use. It's quite broad, but it's encompassing, right? So that's the one we use, but there are many different ones. They all kind of share some of the characteristics of it. But it's this next part that I want to kind of focus our presentation and time together. And it's from a colleague of Dr. Jay's and I. His name is Dr. Mike Gervais, sports psych, mental performance consultant from the Seahawks. And I actually found it on his LinkedIn page and on Instagram. And I loved it in getting ready for today, that Dr. Mike talks about 2 parts of resilience. It's about recovery, which our definition from HeadSet looks at, but it also looks at rebounding. And that's what Dr. Jay and I are going to look at, the recovery piece, which is so important to start us off in regards to those people who are athletes, but also for the people that support those individuals who are athletes. And then there's a rebounding piece. And in the middle, it says it's not about just recovery, that bouncing back, but it's about bouncing forward into a better place. And I really like those 2 components. And our presentation or topic today is specific to those 2 important areas, recovery and then bouncing to a better place, that rebounding part. And in regards to these are the last terms before we get into it. For recovery and rebounding, there are 2 important systems in our body and in our brain, but important concepts as well. They're known as the X system and they're known as the C system in regards to resilience. The X system is a very primitive way of undertaking any challenges or stressors that an athlete may have, but it is very primitive, impulsive. It's very body driven. It's almost kind of what you've heard before in working with athletes from your school days or just from conversation. It's that fight or flight or freeze piece, right? There's a stressor, there's a challenge, and then it's our body that takes on the stressor, and it's very primitive, right? It's all about safety for the athlete. It's all about safety for the human being. And it's quite spontaneous. It's very quick. It's fast processing, and it's very body driven. But the X system connects to our brain, but those go back and forth really quickly. But when someone has a stressor that they have to recover from, it's the X system that starts it off. The C system, which is for the reflective system, is a more intentional, more controlled, more higher level, slower processing, slower thinking. It's almost like a greater analysis. When an athlete or a human being takes on a stressor, it's often that X system that's first. You got to take that on first before you can get to the C system, right? And that's that recovery and then the rebounding piece. So I wanted to just kind of put those terms forward, and it may be ones for us to use in the future with our athletes, but even with athletes who are here today and might be listening to this. So here's a couple of examples, and I love both of these examples. One is recent. The other is one that we've used for a long period of time. The female athlete on the right, her name is Heather Dornenden, and her clip went viral. It's over a decade ago. So it's late 2000s, 2008, 2009. And Heather Dornenden at the time was a long distance runner for the University of Minnesota. And she fell in a 600-meter event indoor and 200-meter track 3 times around. She fell at the beginning of the 3rd turn. She picks herself up, races back, and wins the entire event. The next athlete is more recent. Her name is Sifan Hassan, and she is a long distance runner from the Netherlands who won 2 gold medals and a bronze medal. But she's very well known from the Olympic Games, so Tokyo 2020-21, where she fell down during the last lap of the 1500. So high level Olympic Games, she falls down, trips over someone's foot, and then picks herself back up and then wins her heat. She went on to win a bronze in that one, then 2 golds after. But those are 2 great examples for me, right? Those are a little extreme when someone falls down, but I think we can, as athletes, as support people, as coaches, administrators, there will be times when our athletes are going to fail. They're going to fall. They may not literally fall like our examples here, but that's when that X system starts. And we have to take proper time and effort to be able to recover based on that X system, right? So it's very spontaneous, impulsive. The athlete may feel overwhelmed, but some athletes like Safan and Heather take it on in a better way or improve from it than other athletes. So kind of think about that. Think about your sports, think about the sports you coach, the sports that you're a part of or work with those athletes, and think about how it's the importance of the recovery before we can get to the rebounding, right? And I just have one more slide. I'm gonna turn over to Dr. J for an example, but this is where, for me, in the work that I do, it's in HeadSet or in private practice. When I hear someone who has encountered a stressful occurrence in sport, or they're getting ready for a really big event, we talk about the recovery piece. Sometimes I call it failing fast. Sometimes I call it recovery. But in regards to the applied side, I often tell athletes, when you feel this way, you got to keep it simple, right? That's very important, because when you continue to try to think more, it's just going to overwhelm you. When you try to work more, it's going to try to overwhelm you. So it's that nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So we got to calm our body down to get to the rebounding. And for me, breathing is absolutely necessary after you have this event. So an example could be the person in tennis loses a key point and there's a transition from game to game. It could be a hockey goalie or a soccer goalie gets scored on. To me, that's pressure or stress. How do you come back from it? And Dr. J and I are former goalies in hockey. We can attest to this from our playing days, right? So breathing's an important, keep it simple strategy, but it must be methodical, really slow, breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, belly breathing, right from the diaphragm rather than chest breathing or very quickly in through your mouth. So that breathing part's really important for a strategy. Number 2, I like to call them anchors. You have to find something to be able to keep you in the present, because it's very primitive. When you feel stress or pressure, your mind's going to race, your body's going to move faster. So you got to anchor yourself. So there must be some object in your environment to be able to keep you present. You can look at this afterwards. I often give the example, a Rafael Nadal, who's currently hurt in tennis, but 20-time champion, during switchovers, for him to be present, he works on his water bottles. So he'll always take his water bottles and he'll center himself. Some people think it's kind of obsessive. For him, he just says, that's for me to get recentered, get ready for the next point, next game. I have a sports psychology group I get together for the Toronto Marathon. We actually cut the final ribbon of the Toronto Marathon and we cut it into pieces. And we actually give it to marathon runners and we actually pin it to their pinny. And we haven't been there for a couple of years because of COVID, but before the pandemic, we used to pin these on athletes' jerseys or their shorts. And then we tell people, rub it. When you're in a time of need, when your mind is racing, your body is giving out, you got to rub it. Like it's an object, but it's keeping it centered. It's keeping it present, because often athletes, when they're feeling pressure, they move forward or they move backwards, and it's hard to stay present. Number 3 here, but it's the 4th one, is self-talk. It's more about belief, right? So when you're feeling pressure and you're trying to recover, self-talk is absolutely necessary. But you have to figure out, as an athlete, in your time of need, prepare for it. What are the words? What are the images? And then finally, I really like to keep things task-oriented, right? So I tell athletes, focus on one task, one play on defense, one play on offense. If you are a goalie coming back, maybe it's about your angles. It's one task, process-oriented activity. And it's done quickly. Like, I'm going through these, but it's failing fast. It's keeping it simple. And you have to have these in a time of need to be able to recover for resilience. But Jay, I'm going to send it over to you for some additional pieces on this.
So I guess I would throw a question out there to our group that's listening today and partaking. Does anyone in our group have times where either you as an athlete or you working with an athlete have someone say to you or share with you that they are constantly thinking of bad things happening? Maybe you as an athlete are seeing bad things happening in your visualization, or you're working with an athlete and they say to you, I keep seeing bad things happening. Does anybody have that going on now with their game, with their mental preparation before they play, or maybe with people they're working with? Anybody? I might just throw somebody under the bus here and ask. Okay, Nigel. All right, Nigel, are you able to unmute yourself, Nigel? Or do we have to unmute you? Let's see if we can find you here.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Nigel, thank you for jumping in. I really appreciate it, buddy. Can you share a little bit about what you mean by that and what your situation is?
Oh, well, I'll give you a real life example. Let's talk about my golf game.
Nigel, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm already jealous because you have a golf game.
if you want to call it golf. Actually, so I mean, there are times when you step up to that first tee and you start to say, "Geez, I hope I don't hit it bad, or I hope I don't do it this way." Right? So I've already got negative thoughts in my mind about how I'm going to be able to approach my first shot off the tee. So I think that would be a very good example of having negative thoughts. Now the question is, how do you bounce back from that after you've hit that shot, good or bad? That's what we're talking about today, right?
Yeah. And Nigel, thank you for jumping in. I really appreciate it, buddy. One of the things that I come across with a lot in teams that I work with, even private practice one-on-one, is when they hit that comfort zone with you, right? That they say, Jay, I have these thoughts going through my head and I think about negative things. And this is where we really start to educate the athlete, the coach, whoever it may be, that those negative things can be a positive. It can be part of your task of things to go over. And especially when you're dealing with younger athletes, I like to let them know that the power of the negativity that they're seeing again and again is truly something that can be positive. Because when you drop that ball in baseball, or you drop that pass in whatever it is that you're playing, when you see those negative things happening, one of the first things that Peter mentioned that is important with that negative scenario is to see you responding to that negative scenario, rather than it's just sitting there going, oh. So in golf, what I do is this: whenever I see water, Nigel, I just start sweating. Like I want to tell people, hey, look over there and see how far I can throw my ball. But what I do now is this: I think of things such as the sound of when I hit the ball well. I think of a task of hitting that ball, but I associate that task, that something that used to be negative for me, with a sound, a one little task, and that's following through. And I take a task like what Peter was talking about, and I implement something like sound or vision or a combination of both when I'm talking about building that resiliency in my athletes that I work with. And it's to take something that might be a negative, associated with an immediate positive. You've fallen down, see yourself getting right back up. You're worried about making contact, think of the sound of when you hit it. And it almost makes you want to hit it rather than dread hitting it. So I immediately try and take that negative associated with a positive as quick as possible, or taking that negative and showing that it's a positive. One of the things that I used with a professional cycling team that I work with for years is we used hockey tape. Go figure, two hockey players, Peter and I, trying to bring in hockey into everything we do. But I would take hockey tape and I would get each of the athletes to tape it on the crossbar, just below their handlebars, 3 things that they need to focus on throughout their race, 3 things that made them feel comfortable when they're racing, 3 things that they looked forward to while racing. So when they had those really moments of those hills, those climbs, things that maybe they've dreaded. Now we're focusing on something that's really kind of fun, or something that is going to help us lead us to victory, shall we say. So what I like to do is, in taking the task orientation that Peter points out here, is how do we take those tasks and associate them with not just positive, but anchor of positive, an anchor that we can rely on when we're getting right back. So when you think of the keywords of reflective and reflex, we want to be able to respond in a positive way, bouncing forward with something that's easy to attain, something that's easy to remember, and something that's empowering. That's what I like to implore when I'm using this mentality of helping people with resiliency building. We've got a couple here. Coach John Fitzgerald, thank you. He says something really great here. He says, as a coach, when things are not going well, at times I see negative processes or outcomes. I see that all the time. And how do we reframe that? So maybe, John, can I throw you under the bus a little bit? If you could unmute yourself. What do you do to reframe that? At times I see negative processes or outcomes.
I always just kind of reset myself and just realize that I can control the outcome, or I can control what needs to be done. Obviously I can't control the outcome, but I can control a little bit more. Maybe I have to structure a practice different. I have to reword what I'm saying to my athletes. Maybe those are the things that I just have to, I take it upon myself, like, okay, they're not getting it. I have to just change my vocabulary or the way I'm showing it, or just even dumbing it down and making it even simpler, and just walking through the drill, or having them understand what needs to be done.
Yeah, vocabulary is huge. Vocabulary is huge. And as a former hockey player, I'm always trying to work on my vocabulary, because at best we have like 30 words in our word bank at best. Brian Lindsay, Brian, I love what you've written here. It's Brian shares a great little note to everyone. I believe all of us deal with athletes who lack a belief in themselves and their abilities. And I want to bring this back to Peter, because Brian, your point is something we're going to address here in a few minutes, but it's a huge point that you share, that a lot of athletes hit that wall at some point in time where they begin to doubt themselves. Mm-hmm. And then that's when we really are able to test what kind of resiliency does that athlete have. So Peter, I don't want to take too much.
And I love it. And this is what we want, right? It's the conversation, it's the interaction. And you all have me thinking about one additional pieces. And in work with athletes, is trying to put forward with athletes, when these things are happening, to acknowledge and accept, right? That, like Brian said, like, it's the belief. Your belief might be down, but it's acknowledging that it is, and then coping to get it to a place that you want to. Is Coach John talking about knowing or accepting that things aren't the way he wants them, and he's just going to do it differently very, very soon, right? So that acknowledgement and acceptance, rather than that denial piece. And again, I'm dating myself in regards to my playing career, but years ago, it would be denial, push it aside. Right now, it's even sometimes challenging for me to say, like, this is what you need to do. You need to acknowledge that you're feeling this way, accept it, but then you got to cope. Right? I think a lot of what we're talking about today is being able to cope and finding those strategies. And as everyone has said, like, every athlete's a little bit different in regards to how they do it. So everyone, this is fantastic, right? This is what we're wanting in regards to the conversation. So I brought this slide again. So the next few slides are more about the rebounding piece, the reflective piece. You have more time. It's after you've gone through the reflexive piece, but now you can take on the reflective piece. More intentional, more controlled, higher kind of level of understanding, analysis, and decision-making. And I'd like to use this with athletes. Dr. J likes to use it as well here, is the 3 C's of resilience, right? It's a nice package. Athletes like this because when they hear 3 C's, they can remember it, right? And they link it to resilience. They link it to rebounding. And this term and these three C's were coined by two industrial organizational psychologists who did work with executives and people in the workplace. And they looked at mergers and acquisitions. And they studied people who were, I guess, had a higher level of health and rebounding than people that didn't in regards to their stressors. And Suzanne Kobasa and Salvatore Medi, they found these three were highly influential in regards to what they called hardiness, resilience, versus people who were non-resilient. And then through HeadSet in our private practice, Jay and I have kind of used this, and we found some success in it because athletes can look at this and go, oh, I can use this, right? I can use this in real time. So we want to go through those three C's, and maybe we'll stop after the three C's, go back to having a little bit of conversation about trying to implement these. So here's the first one. And the first one is known as challenge for the three C's. So an athlete that uses this C, the challenge, is seeing these stressors or challenges or obstacles as something exciting. Okay, they're looking at it in an optimistic, an opportunity for growth, that they can get better from it. They don't see it as a threat. So it's actually looking at a challenge versus threat. And then people who use this C look at a stressor as something that is challenging. So seeing the change or challenge as an opportunity to develop themselves as an athlete. We have an example for each one or a couple for each one. Recently, Katie Ledecky is a nice one that I love to talk about. So Katie Ledecky, US Olympic swimmer, highly decorated, one of the most decorated female athletes of all time. And if you were to research just Katie Ledecky and resilience, it will bring you to an article of how her coach, every single practice on purpose, makes her resilience. She says her coach sets her up. And again, we have to look a little bit deeper into it than an article online, but Katie Ledecky says that her coach pushes her that she fails every single practice. And they talk about how to overcome those challenges every single practice. So when she gets to the Olympics, when she gets to a world championship, when she gets to a meet, she's already worked on the challenges, right? And she sees it as opportunity. I've done this before. I've grown from this. I can continue to grow from this. And more recently, from the past Olympic Games, the Summer Olympics in Tokyo, she lost her first event. And she came back. So if you do a Katie Ledecky rebounding 2020 Olympics, you'll find some nice articles of how she came back from losing her first event to really doing well and rebounding for her next, I think it was 4 or 5 events afterwards. Next is known as control. Some people call it controlling the controllables. There are 2 examples here, both Canadian, so repping the Canadian athletes here, Olympic athletes. One is gold medalist Damian Warner, decathlete. And then we have Andre DeGrasse, gold medalist, bronze medalist, won a couple bronze medals from the previous Olympic Games and a gold and bronze from this Olympic Games. And both of these did really well through COVID with controlling the controllables. So controlling the controllables, or control, is a sense of having belief that you can influence the outcomes. Here it's in your life, but in your athletics. And Damian Warner, because of COVID, couldn't travel down south to perform and train for the Olympics. So he was stuck in Canada. Canada in the wintertime, for those that are not Canadian, and where he's from, London, Ontario, where he was training, very cold, very snowy, not like Florida where he should have been. So what he did with his coaches, they rented out an old hockey arena with no temperature gauges, and he trained in the arena. And there were many times where he said, I don't know if I can do this. I'm falling behind. But he used the control piece. Well, I can control this. I control my attitude, control my training. Andre DeGrasse as well. Through COVID, he was in Florida, but he couldn't train 4 weeks. He tore his hamstring at one time, became a new father. And he often talked about through his entire career, but recently about controlling the controllables. So I really like that C. And then last one is commitment. And commitment is when you are engaged or have engagement with a bigger purpose, more meaning. So a mission statement, a value statement, an overall purpose and goal, right? So that's helpful for athletes to rebound is when they can turn to their purpose, because every athlete, every season will have a time when things aren't going well. And in the work that we do, we often go to that bigger purpose. I know for work with some athletes at the beginning of a season, we go through mission statements, we go through value statements. You have to figure out who you are as an athlete this year and always come back to it. Read it, reread it. When times are tough, go back to it. So commitment is an engagement in the overall purpose. And here are a couple of Paralympic swimmers. Jessica Long, people might know from a Toyota commercial that was aired during the Olympics, but also during the Super Bowl. And if you have a chance, look up Jessica Long, Toyota commercial, Paralympics, and you'll see some really nice resilience videos and articles on her, just so you can kind of take away and look on your own. Jay, I'm putting it back over to you. Any additional thoughts or comments here in regards to the 3 C's?
You know, with these 3 C's, I think that I could talk for days on them, because I think any of us who work with athletes and develop that bonding relationship with them, a coach, team, whatever it may be, you could take any of these elements and customize it to the need of each athlete. And I find myself doing that a lot with the athletes that I work with one-on-one. But I'm going to reflect on something that Brian has put here. And Brian says, you know, I believe all of us deal with athletes who lack a belief in themselves and their abilities. And I reflect back to you, Brian, maybe if you can unmute yourself. I want to ask you, are there athletes in particular that are going through your mind that you're working with that have that situation? Can you unmute yourself? Okay, so he sends another note back and he goes, as a former goalie in hockey, I often have said to athletes that I would not have enjoyed my 35 years of an incredible journey in hockey if I would have quit. Are you there, Brian?
Can you hear me?
Hear you. That's awesome.
You're in.
Okay. Oh, well, you know, I'm a swim coach now. You know, you go back to, like, your athletes step up on the block and they're, you know, and they have a disappointing first swim of a swim meet, yet they have, you know, 4 more races in which to go. And, you know, like the Katie Ledecky article, it's, you know, you're setting yourself up. Okay, you gotta take the eraser and you gotta erase that first. But what did I try to reframe it? Like, what did you learn in that first race? Sometimes you put, as a coach, you put them in a situation where it's just a warm-up swim, right? It's getting them ready for their primary event, but they need to get wet. They need to feel the competition. They need to feel the environment. They, you know, some of them have very, I always say, weak nerves, and that, you know, physically they're ready. You know, I know what they've done in practice. I looked at their sets. I delivered their set. You know, here's your workouts. Like, you can swim 100 meters fast. You can swim a 200-meter fast. You're doing 4,000 meters. Like, I mean, I've coached swimmers in the past that, you know, I've done the English Channel, have done Lake Ontario. Those swimmers had an amazing belief in themselves. They knew they were ready. You know, we did it daily, and I always try to reframe it into, I call it myself, and I was reflecting on this today, was, you know, I've been a situational coach in any sport that I've coached. I always try to prepare the athlete to deal with the physical and the mental situation that they're going to be presented with in their most stressful time. And, you know, you guys were goalies in hockey, and I remember going through that with goalies, sitting down and saying, okay, you've got a group of bodies in front of you. You've got a shot coming in from the point. what are you going to do with that shot? But what if it's deflected, and you know what you want to do with the rebound? Because a lot of times you might want to kick out the rebound past the scrum that's in front of you. So it's to me, it's dealing as a coach, you really have to think of the many different variables that your athletes are going to be faced with. When you're dealing with an 800 freestyle, you're dealing with a 1500 freestyle, you're dealing with open water swimmers as an example. And I just use that as an example. You've got to get them physically into a state in practice and then ask them to go fast when they're totally exhausted.
It's a good point you bring up, Brian. One of the things that you mentioned there that hit a key with me is that in the different athletes that you've worked with who've done the different challenges, one of the things that I find very valuable is knowing which of the 3 C's best is attributable to them and their situation. Maybe it's a combination. Is that resiliency time a time where we need to challenge that athlete? Or is it a time that we need to remind that athlete of the commitment that they've made? Or is it that time where we need to remind them yet again of the control, like what you're saying? How are you going to respond in this moment, because you can respond? I think the key when we talk about resiliency is giving them the tools. 3 C's are a perfect example of implementation of different tools. You're challenging, you're controlling, you're committing to the situation, but also really knowing that athlete and what he or she needs. Is it a reminder? Is it a little push? Is it that little hug that lets them know you can do this? Remember why you're doing this. Remember how it feels you doing this. Peter's example of taking that ribbon that you break and just rubbing it, that tactile feeling of reminding you, seeing the cup, seeing yourself break the tape, seeing, in your case, touch the wall, that feeling of touching the wall. It's everything, right? But then really figuring out what that athlete needs. Do they need to be challenged, reminded of their commitment, or reminded of the control? That's what's important, I think, to me, when we really talk about resiliency. When we talk about resiliency in terms of things we see in movies, you look at the person who picks themselves up off the mat, right? Rocky Balboa, right? Rocky gets up off the mat. What is it? Is it the corner saying, get up, get up, get up? Is it the memory of, the vision of the people that he's getting up for? Is it, to get back at all those people who said he couldn't do it, right? Like, which one of those C's is it for Rocky, right? And if you can tap into the C that's most potent for Rocky, that's what I think you're really building and strengthening resiliency in athletes.
And sometimes it's, and I've experienced this, as a goalie, sometimes you influence your teammates. And I can remember going from a team that was always winning to a team that was kind of new or unsure of themselves. They didn't have that winning reputation. Like, you played and had to play with teams that were down 5-0 after 2 periods and still believed they could win the hockey game. And it just takes that one save. And I can remember still vividly to this day, and that's like, 40 years ago, where you've let in 2 goals in the first minute on the first 2 shots, and you say, you can feel the team, but it's that next save, and then you focus as a goalie on the next shot and stopping. And I remember winning that game 3-2, and all of a sudden the whole team changed on that very game. And we went on to have, I'm not saying we had a championship season, but we had a fairly successful season. And it just took just that one game to change the, as you're saying, it was a rebounding. All of a sudden the team rebounded in that particular game, but it took, I always felt that it took my belief in myself to know that I wasn't going to let the next shot in from the you know, the 59-minute mark on. And some players in team sports, they don't know how much they can influence their teammates. And so playing a team game versus an individual game, you know, you don't need a coach to get that attitude change. Sometimes it can be just one player's, and it could be the captain, it could be the team, you know, a team leader who may not be the captain. In this case, it was myself as a goalie, and we just got to keep that belief in ourselves.
Well, you bring up a huge point, and I know this is something that we're going to segue into right now, that Pierre's going to talk about, and it's understanding, you know, the power of one. You know, that do you understand the power of your contributions to your team? But Brian, awesome stuff, Brian. You, Peter, and I together in a car, we could drive across in the blink of an eye. It'd be scary.
Here's the last part. That was awesome. So here's the last part to the topic today, and this is a little bit about social support, and the conversation really lends into this recent conversation lends into the social support piece. So it's building trust and resilience together. Right? And you hear athletes, after they are able to recover and rebound, they often talk about the important people. It could be teammates, it could be coaches, it could be the strength and conditioning staff, the support people around. And that could be for independent sport athletes or interdependent sport athletes. So team or individual, it's the importance of having the right people to be able to build resilience together. And I'll go through these pretty quickly, and then we'll wrap things up with some additional questions. But these are some of the things that we've, and this is more HeadSet oriented, when groups have used the application, when they have worked on it together. So HeadSet is an individual application, but when we work with groups and they're able to share their stories, that's very, very influential and significant for resilience building. And we have 3 different points here. So one is when we work with groups, they do individual HeadSet, the application, but then we'll bring them into mini groups. There'll be 4 to 6 people in groups, and then they will talk about those 5 pillars, and they'll talk about resilience. So what mental workouts are they working on? How have they learned from resilience in the past? So they're just not working on resilience on their own, but they're sharing it. And when individuals share stories, it's about harnessing that experience. So I would love for people in whatever function as a individual sport athletes to be able to share their stories of resilience, but listen to others. If you're a coach, maybe have your team and also you sharing stories of resilience, right? And those are important. So mini groups, sharing stories, and the final piece here, and we have it under legacy. Sometimes it's even outside of the group where you can find resilience. So this is more pro team oriented, but sometimes you have alumni, sometimes you have a fan base where you're able to build resilience from it. And this is just recently, and you can take a look at it after our conversation sometime this week, but I was really touched by, so Tom Brady plays on the weekend, he throws a 600 touchdown, and at the end of the game, there's a kid holding up a sign that said Tom Brady helped him recover from cancer. And then Tom Brady went over, gave him a hat, they shared an experience, but those are the experiences from outside of the group. So it's a larger group that we can actually learn from to bring in and build resilience. So, right, just summing it all up, resilience is built from within, but if you can build it from outside in, it will increase it that much more. So that's an important last piece for us. But I'm going to throw it over to you, Jay, if you have any additional parts to add to that. I just kind of went to a PowerPoint here, a slide that has some nice books that people can purchase or pick up online, or still go into the library, pick them up and take a look through them. They're really nice reads on resilience and hardiness.
Yeah, I think the last part that I'll throw in is whenever we're talking about resiliency and developing resiliency within an athlete, team coach, whatever it may be, it's to bring something to light, and there's never an amazing sports story till something bad happens. We never see movies of people who just win, 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 win. The movies that we're drawn to and the movies that are the ones that make us smile and the ones that we use as some reflective piece are the movies of someone who was down and they worked their way back up. A person that was thought of as maybe like when Brian mentioned it wasn't the best team, but it was a team that forged ahead and took on challenges that no one thought they could ever face. And when you share that moment with an athlete, a coach, a team, it's amazing to see their face afterwards. It's amazing to see their body afterwards. It's amazing to see how they kind of look around the room and they smile, and you'll see them share a little story here, a little story there, and all of a sudden they start realizing, that's sports. It's being down and coming back up. You can't have peak performance unless you were down here somewhere. And when we talk about that, that's when we really are talking about being an athlete. And that's climbing, fighting, grinding it out, going from an injury that people have written you off on to now being back and throwing the game-winning pass, making the game-winning save, touching the wall first, and letting them know it's okay to be down. We're just working on our way back up to the top. And just a little reminder, insight of being down is part of the game. That's just how it's supposed to go. Can change the tide for that team, for that player, for that athlete in a blink of an eye. So usually it's our job to talk about positive things and put smiles on faces, but it's sometimes really interesting when we talk about the development of resiliency, that talking about the bad can also be just as powerful of a good for that athlete or that team. But I throw one out there. Does anyone else have any questions that they may have or anything they might want to share with a story of resiliency, or maybe something that was successful for them as a coach or even as an athlete that they're now passing on? Any of you have any cookies of wisdom, insight of when things weren't so well, but now you've passed it on and it's helped? Anything of that nature? And feel free to unmute if any of you have a good success story. Nigel, I'd love to hear about your best drive, to be quite honestly. I'm ready to talk some smack talk with you, just so you know.
And maybe this is a good and having it here too is, we can interact outside of this, right? So we from social media, we have our social media channels. We're trying our best to put out stories of resilience. So here's just a little something for you all. If you want to follow us, even for yourself or athletes that you have, if you want to register for HeadSet or our newsletter, please go to our website, go to the App Store or Google Play, and you can download. We'd love to hear from you, keep the conversation going. And I see Nigel up here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say with Tom Brady, if everyone knows his story, how he wasn't the best athlete coming out of college. In fact, if you know his story, I think he was like 5th on the depth chart in Michigan when he started. And he had to keep fighting and bouncing back. He was told he wasn't very good. And yes, he ended up being the starting quarterback at Michigan. And then when he got to the NFL, everyone knows the famous story about his combine, right? Mm-hmm. I ran the worst combine, the worst 40, I think, in the history of the combine. But he was resilient. He bounced back, and guess the rest is history. So I think he's the ultimate poster child for being resilient.
Yeah, he actually joked about that. So he was on ESPN last night, and he actually joked about it, his combine, and how terrible it was with Peyton and Eli Manning last night. So it was really funny to hear that. He's still talking about it. But one part about Tom Brady too, Nigel, and for everyone, can you imagine being in that league for 20 years and how process-oriented this guy must be? Oh. Even though the outcomes are there, like all the championships, the MVPs, the 600 passes, but this guy is the epitome of process orientation. It's incredible for him to be able to, from the very beginning to where he is now, you just gotta tip your hat to him or helmet to him and just go, yeah, like resilience through and through.
Yeah, yeah.
I would give anything to watch him talk smack. What do you say to that? Like, what do you say to that guy, right? Like, what could you possibly say?
Yeah.
And, you know, you look at what's stuck in my mind when I think of the combine and I think of performance in the combine. I don't know about you, Nigel, but I just keep thinking of that picture that they show with him. It looks like, you know, he's never been to a thing called a gym in his life. The closest he's ever gotten to a gym is his next door neighbor gym. And then he's the greatest of all time, right? Yeah. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, but yeah, I would agree with you. He'd be my top 5 for sure. For sure. Anyhow,
are there any other questions, thoughts, comments before we wrap things up? This has been a pleasure to just kind of go through this and have the interaction. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is great. Well, on my side, Nigel, thank you for letting me throw you under the bus. You're awesome. Thank you for jumping in. Brian, you as well. And John, always thank you for sharing. It's always great when we get people in the mix. And thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.